Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Tang, and I'll be your moderator today on the topic of ISO 20022 as a value-added service. A little bit about me. I've been in the financial service industry for almost 12 years now, and I'm currently the Director of Payments Data and Innovation within the Enterprise Payments team here at CIBC. So more specifically, I'm responsible for ensuring that CIBC is ready for ISO 20022 when it does arrive. I'd like to take a moment. I'll introduce our panel today. First off, we got Nilo, Jena, who has over 15 years of experience within the consulting and financial services industry. She's currently the Senior Director at CIBC on the Enterprise Payments Shared Services team. She currently oversees the initiatives that touch both high value and everyday payment types, and her team is responsible for the ISO 20022 initiatives, along with other key payment modernization programs. Next, we have Nishant Chandran, who is the Vice President of Digital Payments and Capabilities with JP Morgan's wholesale payments business here in Canada. In his current role, Nishant is focused on a number of priorities, including the development of digital payments, digital capabilities, and innovation. With over 15 years of experience of banking and here in Canada, he has found his passion for innovation, product development, and process improvement. He currently co-chairs the RTR Working Group and is a member of the RTR Management Committee and Fraud Steering Committees as well. Next, we got Defne Arslan, who is the management consultant with Deloitte for the past 5 years. She has a deep understanding of the evolving payments landscape, both globally and within Canada. In her current role, Defne supports FIs to navigate the intricacies of payments modernization initiatives with a specific focus on RTR, links, and ISO 20022. But last but not least, with over 20 years of Payments Canada experience, Charlie Clark has been involved in the Payments Canada ISO 20022 journey since 2011. Now, with the initial ISO 20022 payment standard initiative, she's actually one of our OGs. She's one of our originals, so welcome. She's been instrumental in developing the ISO 20022 usage guidelines for Canada for retail batch payments and high-value payments, as well as building the internal governance infrastructure to support PayCan and its members in the adoption of ISO 20022 in Canada. Now, she's also been a member of various market practice groups, including HVPS, ISO 20022, and other various common global implementation groups as well. So, panelists, welcome. First and foremost, I guess I'll start off with a question for you guys is, why do we need to care about achieving a global standard for payment messaging when we've seen other jurisdictions adopt variations of the ISO 20022 standard? Defne, why don't we start with you?
Perfect. So Key, I think it's about striking a balance between efficiency, interoperability, and flexibility. At the crux of it, a common standard will promote operational efficiencies. Participants in the ecosystem will be able to leverage a single messaging format for all payment types. A common standard that is also global will promote interoperability, which essentially removes the friction that exists today in sending money across borders. So one may wonder why other jurisdictions are adopting flavors of ISO 20022. And the reason for that is that the implementation journey of ISO is a multi-year initiative, often one that requires significant initial upfront investments, as well as buy-in from all stakeholders. And the primary drivers of the adoption can tend to either be a compliance play or very focused on jurisdictional use cases. So we've seen that some jurisdictions that adopt later versions of the standard, a trade-off can be made within those efficiencies that can be achieved. So FIs, for example, may still need to use some manual interventions in payments as opposed to leveraging a fully automated solution. So as a result, when those, flexibilities are made, we do see sometimes that it can undermine efficiency. So I think one thing that we should be keeping in mind is to seek a common denominator across global implementations, such that we can continue promoting those efficiencies without hindering broader adoption.
Awesome. So Nishant, what are your thoughts to that?
Well, Daphne's absolutely right. Interoperability is important. We live in an increasingly globalized environment. Online models are driving change, the way business is done, and increasingly new economy use cases are driving greater globalization of services, right? So without a global standard, we're going to introduce friction, we're going to introduce cost and overhead to the payments process, making it more difficult for our clients to operate, especially if they operate in multiple geographies. Now, I want to emphasize that variations in the ISO standard are inevitable. I mean, we operate in different markets, so there's going to be differences. But it's important to resist the urge to create a Canada-specific ISO standard. It's also important to drive the essential elements to a globally consistent schema. In the long run, this reduces friction of payments and will make cross-border payments as easy as domestic payments, which should be the objective. right? With regulatory environments tightening globally, the ability to quickly adjudicate payments will depend heavily on structured data that's carried with these payments. Establishing a global standard, or the closest that we can come to it, will allow for more efficient adjudication, as Daphne mentioned, better STP rates, and lower costs, which should be the objective. As markets on previous versions of ISO clearing schemas might want to update to the latest version, having a globally consistent format will allow us all to be consistent with those schemas as well.
Perfect. So you actually brought up a really good point, right? When we talk about straight through processing rates, there's a lot of focus on speed and data in regards to the payments. So Nilo, over to you. Why is it important for us as an industry to move here?
As Nishant brought up, with globalization, we're seeing a lot more market integration, as well as COVID has accelerated a lot of these digitization trends as well. How we're seeing the financial industry is going to evolve further into more client partners in their journey to in finance sector, rather than just the financial service provider. It is important for the clients and the finance industry to work together to ensure the right financial decisions are made on the right time. And this requires contextual data, as well as speed of the data to be delivered to the client on the right time for making the right decisions. And if we have seen a trend of increasing competition with the fintechs in the financial industry as well. And if we don't start getting into the bandwagon sooner, we may be left behind. So that is very important as well. So mapping of data, mapping of speed, and as well as delivered with ease. Those will be key factors.
And Charlie, what are your thoughts to Nilo's comments there?
Yeah, I totally agree with Nilo here. Actually, I think we've known about the importance of moving to this space in the Canadian environment for a very long time now, since 2011, when the government set the direction for the priorities for electronic payments to be ISO 20022, the global standard. So the driver for that being the rich data, the and the remittance information, and the efficiency borne by automated reconciliation and SDP straight through processing. So there's really not much I can add to here, including the fact that the pandemic has really shone a light on this this year, putting an emphasis on the need for payments to be made faster and more data to be arriving with payments. And as Nilo said again, the fintechs have been making waves in this space for a long time, and it's mainly because they don't have that legacy systems that we do, or we in the financial sectors have, and we don't have the governance, or they don't have the governance and regulatory requirements yet, at least. So it's up to us to now catch up and make sure that we're evolving with the needs of the landscape.
And so understanding the importance of banks moving towards and adopting the ISO 20022, what are some of the key challenges you think financial institutions will face during this migration? And what are some of the trends that you see in this migration, whether that's a pro or a con? Nilo, we'll start back with you, since we started with you last question as well.
Yeah, for sure. When ISO 20022 is providing a lot of opportunities in terms of, higher STP rates, reconciliation, at the same time, it comes with its own challenges. Definitely it requires a lot more coordinated efforts amongst all its stakeholders, which includes the government, the service providers, the banking, the clients even. And it requires gaining support and coordination in terms of launch abilities as well. Provided it's also requires upgrade to a lot of legacy system, it requires not only the workforce to support the work, but also the funding to support the huge undertaking of work as well. In terms of finding the talent, when all the financial industry are running towards the same direction, educating the clients as well as educating the team members and training them is going to be a bigger task for the team as well as we work through this.
Fair enough. And Charlie, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, from a market infrastructure perspective, we have a unique view into the pains of the system, into the pains of the industry. And obviously the key challenge here is bringing everybody together, bringing all the stakeholders together to collaborate effectively in that journey. So from design to development to implementation, the complexity is borne by the fact that there's so many stakeholders, as Nilo just said, and the implementation requirements are massive. ISO 20022 is such a dramatic change from what we're used to. It means a drastic, complex, and expensive development for all. So from members, again, as Nilo mentioned, members, regulators, corporate service providers, and end users as well. Everybody has a key claim to the migration and a stake to the game. So they have a stake into making sure that the implementation is done right. So from the members' perspective, again, was highlighted, they have a balancing act to sort of make sure that they get right, because they have to balance between the extensive development that they have to do and to make sure that the interoperability of their internal systems, as well as with other members, as well as balancing the needs of their clients and making sure that they're supporting them through this migration as well, which is very important, and offering those services that will meet their needs as well, and especially leveraging these new systems. Then you have the regulators who need to make sure that they are looking at what's on offer and putting the right regulations within that, and then on the other side of that, being government and some of the largest issuers of payments, they are also part of this equation as well, and need to make sure that they are building their systems to be able to meet the needs of their end users as well, who is all of us, right? And I'm going to skip through and we talk about the end users now, who also have challenges. Most of their challenges are resources. So being able to have the resources for, the human resources as well as the financial resources to be able to do this migration. And then also they need to make sure that they are able to speak the new language, because that is huge, that's key. And then on top of that, if they're corporates, they need to make sure that their corporate traders are understanding what these requirements are, and they're going to be speaking the same terms. So they have to make sure that they are in discussions with their trading partners to understand what this new system is going to give them. So with all of those complexities happening, we at the MI space are now trying to choreograph those various needs and making sure that everybody's singing from the same song sheet. So it's a huge task, but we have to get there.
Key, if I can just jump in for a second there, I wanted to make a point that we talked about ISO being a new standard that's coming, but ISO is not new to a number of banks whose clients already use ISO-based standards. Moving to ISO clearing means a lot of change for both the FI and customers, as Charlie just mentioned. But what's important is that this change needs to be about embracing the new standard, as opposed to trying to map the new to the old. To quote a colleague of mine, to map is a trap. This is not a middleware exercise; it's a data governance exercise, and we need to embrace the new standard as it comes to market.
So that's a really good point, right? So in that lens, understanding the complexities around it, understanding all the stakeholders, and understanding that this is net new, it's not a mapping exercise. If I take a look at the ISO timelines, we're still about a few years away from full ISO adoption. Now, so with that kind of context in mind, and everything that you guys have just talked about, what are some of the benefits we can discuss for a client now who wants to be an early adopter? Like Nishant, why don't we go to you?
So as someone who works for an FI that primarily services commercial clients in Canada, we see clients and ERP service providers already supporting and using ISO, right? So in my bank, in my opinion, banks and clearing systems have been the bottleneck in Canada so far, because we don't support ISO-based clearing. Clients that have adopted ISO early will be ahead of the curve as they mature in their use of structured data. But adoption of end-to-end ISO capability, including the clearing piece, will provide a number of benefits. So, use cases could be as diverse as payment tracking, improved straight-through processing, improved reconciliation and automation, improved sanctions and AML screening, which in turn sort of drives straight-through processing and lower cost. Easier machine reading with structured data in ISO type payments would make multiple use cases available to the client, which we probably haven't discovered yet. Opportunity for more descriptive data along with the remittance information that comes from payments will make reconciling those transactions easier. And of course, all of this brings a huge, tremendous opportunity for innovation. So to be honest with you, some of the use cases we haven't even thought of yet. And as this capability comes to market, we'll see them emerge.
Yeah, fair enough. That was exactly like the Google Maps example, right? When they created Google Maps, they didn't realize who was going to use it. Now you got Uber and Uber Eats and a lot of other applications just leveraging those APIs to integrate with them, right?
Exactly.
So Defne, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with Nishant. The benefits of ISO can definitely be far-ranging and can accrue in different time horizons, which makes sense. Some of the use cases we haven't necessarily thought of yet. But I think one point that I'd like to hone in on is that in a recent survey that Deloitte recently published, we actually discovered that multinational corporations in Canada are likely to be the first movers or early adopters for ISO. And the reason for that, when you think about their overall operations, is that MNCs will have likely already have implemented ISO in other jurisdictions, and having more centralized systems and just drive from the center can actually push in the urgency for the ISO adoption. So when you think about the driver for them, they may see ISO as more mission critical, and will see the impacts immediately on their global supply chains and reap the benefits of that immediate automated, for example, reconciliations. So I think when we're thinking about how to discuss benefits with our with clients, I think it's important to understand what type of client they are. Are they one that operates across borders? Are they one that's domestic or regional? As the drivers as well as the needs may be different, and it would be worthwhile to have a very pointed discussion accordingly.
So that's actually a really good segue into the next question. We talk a lot about richer data, a buzzword that we commonly use around the industry. So how can we use this term to help our clients understand the benefits of adopting ISO where payments isn't necessarily at their forefront? So the prime example that comes into our minds is you have Loblaws, for example, who cares a lot about just making sure that the shelves are stocked, groceries are there available for all of their clients. Payments isn't necessarily at their kind of forefront, if you will. So what would be some of the tools that an FI could use to reach these early adopters or barriers that FIs could help clients overcome in adopting ISO? Nishant, why don't we go over to you for this one?
Okay, so as you mentioned Google Maps earlier. I'm going to say that the importance of data has become evident to all of us over the last 20 years or so. We all remember the advent of Gmail. When it first launched, it was a much richer platform, a much more feature-rich platform that was offered for free. We've since realized that Google actually leverages a lot of the insight from that vast amount of data that they collect from the Gmail service, and they're not alone, right? So JP Morgan, for example, has identified data as one of our most valuable assets, and we actually have a program in-house to manage this data more effectively. Our clients are no different. Innovation is present today in almost every sector and is driven by the collection and analysis of deep data sets. So the introduction of ISO at the clearing level will actually allow data to move with a payment, much richer data to move with a payment, and that will enable our clients to better understand and leverage insights by mining this rich data. So a grocery store, in your example, could, for example, gain insight into the efficiency of their supply chain. They could understand how to optimize their payments and reconciliation process. Analyzing their payments and receipts could enable better process discipline, improve their invoicing and collection process, for example. They could facilitate faster shipping, deliver better terms to their suppliers because they've managed to gain efficiencies in their process. Data management with the advent of ISO, UETRs will lead to better tracking and better efficiency. So, there's, like I said, unfortunately, we don't know all the use cases yet because we're just beginning to understand the benefits that will come from richer data. All we know is that there will be benefits.
Okay, fair enough. Nilo, do you have any additional thoughts to that?
Yeah, definitely. Like as I mentioned earlier, and we brought up in a couple of questions before as well, understanding the stakeholder is important, and client is a bigger piece of this puzzle as well. So understanding client value chain is very important. So where their primary activities are, so that as a client partner or a financial partner, if we help them focus on their primary activities, for example, in case of laws, if you're talking about the inbound and outbound logistics as they're and shelving the stores at the right time is going to be critical for them. And we take that effort away so that they can focus only on their logistics while we take care of the STP, the reconciliation. In a business banking world or a small business world, if you look like, they may not have the high valued ERP systems, and their huge accounting teams spending enormous amount of hours just getting through their reconciliation, mapping their invoice to a payment, and if the payment is done properly or not, then mapping it to their accounts payable and receivables. That's a lot of effort. So with richer data, it is also important to explain the clients what this richer data means and how they can use that to benefit their businesses. Education is important, as Nishant brought up, that we're still scratching the surface in terms of use case, and we're all in it together. So education both from the FI perspective and the client and the ERP team's perspective is important. Engaging them in proof of concepts will help to drive this as well, and moving forward to a better data set and helping them in realizing their dreams. And that's what we should all focus on from an FI perspective.
Okay, so we talked about generalization, and we expect that to be at the very beginning of every journey. Nishant alluded to it with not understanding all of the use cases, but we've seen a lot of white papers that have been published that talk about efficiencies gained. And Nishant, you briefly mentioned some of it, like account receivable reconciliation as one example, but kind of poking into that a little bit more. And I want to throw this one over to Charlie. What kind of other value-added services can we see from the enriched data within Canada or from other jurisdictions, whether that is within the marketplace or from FIs themselves? What have you seen?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And if I go back to the market practice perspective, if I may, if you look at the payments catalog of messages on the ISO 20022.org website, you'll see that there are various already value-added message sets that are baked into the portfolio itself. And these were already designed from various countries who saw the benefits of it being standardized and registered with ISO for global interoperability and so on and so forth. There are many of them, but I'm going to give you two examples. So the first one being the big one that we hear about recently, obviously, is request to pay. This has been touted as, the best thing since sliced bread, and I don't eat bread, but for those of you who don't know, request to pay sounds just like it's just like it sounds. It is the facility for a biller to send a message to the consumer to actually pay a bill. And the consumer can either respond positively by sending the actual payment, or respond indicating why the payment is not going to be made, or when it's going to be made, or any number of other responses that it can provide. So to me, in Canada, we already used to something similar, but it's more in a debit format. And the pre-authorized debit, as we have rules on at Payments Canada, is almost older than me, probably 50 years old. And it's while it's had its day, it's now fraught with many challenges. And request to pay, for me, I think is a new functionality that sort of changes or shifts the power dynamic in the payment, and it gives the consumer agency to be able to control the payment, as opposed to just letting things happen on their own account. So that's one value-added service, I think, that's brought by the the message portfolio. The other one that I think is going to be really huge once we have traction with ISO 20022 is the standalone remittance information facility. This I see this as a godsend for these small and medium-sized enterprises who don't necessarily have the financial resources to be able to completely build all of their systems and capabilities for ISO, but yet still want to participate in ISO because obviously they understand the benefits of it and they want to be able to leverage some of those benefits like automated reconciliation and STP and so forth. So the standalone remittance information portfolio basically gives the biller the ability to send a message to the corporate to say, this, or rather the corporate to send a message to say, I'm sending you a payment, but here's the remittance information for that payment outside of the payment chain. To me, that's huge innovation that can be made in the industry moving forward to help continue to bring that adoption rate for ISO 20022 further.
Oh, that's awesome. Nilo, did you want to add on to that at all?
Yeah, for sure. Charlie has already mentioned about the remittance information and as well as the request to pay. Over the period of time, as payments have evolved, so has machine learning and AI has evolved, and data modeling prospects have evolved as well. So few of the areas we could look at it is using this data from cross-selling opportunities perspective. So if you see a client having consistently spending money in a certain way based on their spend pattern, there could be cross-selling opportunities in that respect. If you're looking at a client constantly defaulting, then from a bank perspective or an FI perspective, you could provide loans in that respect as well. The other area I do see is around strategic sourcing. So if a client has, say, a bunch of different types of sourcing providers and they're all doing the same type of work and you see a certain spend pattern, one of the ways you could offer a client reporting on their sourcing activities for strategic sourcing. So those are a few of the areas. Fraud is another big area where you could use it from a KYC and AML perspective as well. So those are the key areas from not only from an FI perspective to build value-added service for the client, but also to client take the data that the FIs have and build a data model on their end to help them run their businesses better.
Oh, that's perfect. So you actually mentioned the fraud use case, having all the ISO data coming into fraud. Like we've heard a lot, at least from the white papers that I've read so far, that we've heard a lot of use cases where the ISO data helps with that in case. Can you share with us some real world examples in how richer data has helped with fraud? And Defne, I'm going to throw this one over to you.
Absolutely. At the risk of oversimplification, what I will say is better data will improve fraud detection models. So when you think about it, lack of structured data that exists in legacy payment messages today can lead to higher risks of misinterpretation of that data, which can increase false positive rates. And at the end of the day, that has a negative customer experience impact. It can delay payments and just cause some frustration. With the introduction of more structured data via ISO, what we've seen certain FIs, like more and more FIs really adopt, are sophisticated fraud scoring and screening solutions, where they're not only are they capable of ingesting ISO-based data, they can ingest higher volumes of that data and provide a real-time fraud score and decision on a transaction. So what that means is when you couple that with the analytics capabilities that are at play with that detailed and historical transaction repository with rich data, you can improve the accuracy of the models by performing behavioral profiling and tuning the rules in order to reduce the false positives. When you think about it, for FIs, fraud is more than just a financial loss problem. It is a customer experience problem. So it's really important, and it's an opportunity to leverage ISO to not only protect Canadians, but ensure a positive and seamless payment experience for them.
Fair enough. Nishant, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Well, not a lot more because Daphne actually got that head on. The space and the format to capture all the parties to the transaction, the fact that we have structured data elements in there, allows for greater width and depth to allow for specific data to be entered with the payment, which causes is less cause for abbreviation of information that we see today on payments, mainly because the format doesn't really allow us a consistent manner to provide that information, right? The next step in my mind would be to leverage this data to sort of start looking at bad beneficiary lists. So if we know there's a fraudulent party that has been using the system consistently, once we identify them, put them on a bad penny list to prevent other transactions from going over there.
So we talked a little bit about a lot of the internal use cases here within Canada. Do we know of any ISO success stories that have happened outside of Canada that we could potentially learn from, like based as Canada as a whole and the industry as a whole? Is there a way for us to, let's say, incentivize FIs or clients alike to adopt these lessons learned? Daphne, what are your thoughts on that?
I think an interesting point of that question is around the success stories. So what we've seen is that jurisdictions that have highlighted ISO adoption as an innovation opportunity instead of a mere compliance exercise have been really successful. And an interesting example of this is in Finland. So when you think about Finland, while the primary, I'd say, driver of adoption was a regulatory mandate driven at the European level, so driven by SEPA, Finland was able to uncover incredible innovation opportunities by taking that one step further. FIs were able to implement the full ISO 20022 standard, but what's really interesting is the fact that they coupled the ISO adoption with their national mandates for the push of electronic payments. So what we saw that as the adoption of ISO was increasing, we also saw them increase the adoption of electronic payments. So in Finland, for example, they essentially saw an uptick of e-invoicing, where today 90% of all invoices are processed electronically. So when you look at it beyond just the immediate benefits, but more holistically at a country level, you can see that ISO can actually enable a digital economy. And if you want to bring that back home, consider how Canada would have been when COVID hit last year and having those incredible digitization opportunities at hand. I think it's an incredible opportunity and really worthwhile to think that a regulatory mandate is definitely successful, but thinking about the broader innovation agendas and real benefits for the overall economy and all of its ecosystem players is really, really interesting and a great thought experiment.
Fair point. Charlie?
Yeah, Daphne talked about the key success stories for adoption, and I wanted to mention one key one from the European perspective, at least with SEPA, is that they had a mandate, and when I say the mandate, I mean that they had a regulatory mandate to go in there. Again, if you think about SEPA's implementation and bringing together not just FIs, but actual countries, and that is something that needed to be mandated for it to work. Otherwise, that would be wrought with challenges. So that's something that we don't have in the Canadian space, and I think that's sort of part of not necessarily a problem, but it's something that we should be aware of. In terms of success stories, I think one that resonated with me was this, we could talk about the US, we could talk about Australia, but I think for me, one that resonated most was the Swiss story. And that was mainly because it was one of the first stories that I heard as we were working towards, during the ISO 20022 payment standards way back in, 2011, sorry, and looking towards implementation and trying to figure out how to get buy-in with with members on that. And we spoke to many different jurisdictions who were actually working on their own implementation, and some who had gone through the implementation as well. And the SIX clearing system in Switzerland had been successfully, implemented, or they were actually almost implemented. And what they were doing was getting that three-pronged sort of view of the payment system and making sure that everybody was involved in the process. They had the service providers and the members and the end users talking to each other to talk about what to expect and to understand, so that when they did finally implement, they were actually speaking through the same song sheet, as I mentioned before. So I think that was crucial to the success of the implementation. And you talk about how could we incentivize FIs and clients alike. I'm not sure that the carrot and stick model is necessarily the best, again, in my humble opinion. I kind of like the idea of trying to make sure you get buy-in, because if you get buy-in, then people are want to go beyond because they believe in the success of it. They believe in the benefits and what they can see from implementation of ISO 20022. So I think achieving that buy-in from members, and I think we are able to, we see that already in the industry, and hopefully this will be a success story yet to come.
If I can just add to that, I mean, Charlie was absolutely right. I mean, the global nature has been for FIs to only do what is mandated, which is understandable given limited resources, limited time, limited money. However, I just wanted to mention that the power of market forces should not be underestimated. Clients want the benefits of richer data, right? And market forces will drive the adoption of the scheme as long as we allow for it, right? So the important thing here is to maintain that focus on the richer data. I also wanted to mention, in terms of success stories, this is ancient history now, but in 2003, during the implementation of ISO 15022, the market saw a huge increase in STP rates. And I expect that with growing regulation over time, when we go to ISO 20022, we would see a similar increase in the STP rates for transactions today. Also, in terms of success, the Bank of England, and the ECB has demonstrated that with strong governance of the program as they implement these changes, you're far more likely to have a smooth transition and wide market adoption, as opposed to a market that does not have those controls. So I'm really glad that as we go through the exercise in Canada, we've had so much interaction with Payments Canada and others to sort of talk about the process as we move forward. In terms of success stories looking forward, I just wanted to mention that India has already implemented and mandated the use of a legal entity identifier, right, which is identified as one of the building blocks in reducing friction in cross-border payments. Now, they've done it in a manner where it's not expected to be widely used initially because the thresholds for that reporting are fairly high. But the important thing is the infrastructure is in place. It's been built for, and everyone's ready for it. So when they decide to, implement a lower threshold, the market will be able to comply. So in my book, that's one of the success stories, and what we should be looking to for the Canadian market.
Right. So like two takeaways for me on that one was, ultimately we've done it in the past and we've seen a massive benefit to the Canadian economy and for the financial industry systems. And then of course we have kind of other countries paving the path for us and saying, hey, this is how you should do it, or here's some of the benefits you can, and some of our lessons learned. So the last question I'll ask before we hop on to questions from the audience is that as FIs are beginning their journey to adopt ISO, a common practice that we've heard of is that they develop their own repository to house all of this data. Could you see any benefits in allowing clients to leverage the FI's repository? And if so, what would they be? And I guess because it's more to FIs, I'll throw it over to Nilo and Nishant. So Nilo, why don't you go first?
So with the FIs, as we're still working through the use cases and the benefits, and working with our clients as well, but definitely building the plumbing and the infrastructure is very important as different types of payments are getting changed to an ISO format. Building a centralized repository will help at a client level to understand their spend pattern, as well as cost avoidance from building multiple repositories by payment type or housing your repositories at different location. So centralization always helps in terms of avoidance and building multiple infrastructure to support the services. how you use it, that infrastructure and that side of analytics is how you usage that still needs to be worked through with working with the clients, working with the other service providers, as well as working with other FIs to launch that service out.
Okay. Nishant, any final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so to begin, I believe, so FIs and large corporate clients have been using ISO for a while. This is not new to them, right? What's missing is ISO clearing in Canada, the ability to carry that information through the clearing systems to the end beneficiary. And you're right, there is significant payments data that resides with FIs today and will only get richer as we move to full ISO clearing, right? The challenge is that every client is not willing or able to mine this data for insights. Which means that some clients will want data packaged for them in a certain way. There will be a specific use case that they're looking to, solve with that data. For example, fraud alerts or the ability to analyze their own data and look at, what sort of transactions are flowing where. While others will want the raw data from the cloud themselves to be able to mine and sort of gain their own insight into. How this data gets used and delivered will evolve, I think, as we move along this journey. With large data sets, one of the big challenges is how do you present this data? Do you actually do this? Do you allow your clients to access it on an online interface? Do you allow them actually the raw data sets? And if so, how do you share that data securely without compromising privacy or any other issues, right? I think we're still understanding what our clients will use this data for. And as we go through the journey and we innovate, we're gonna realize, that there are use cases out there, that our clients do have needs for this information, and we'll have to understand and how we deliver this information to them while still considering issues like liability, risk, privacy, which can be a significant challenge in a country like Canada that has strong privacy laws. Examples of use cases, you could possible fraud detection, determining average processing speed for certain currencies or corridors so that you set the right expectations with your beneficiaries, using data to identify AML sanctions type issues in a payment so that your clients can get ahead of them before they actually submit these payments. Those would be the key use cases, I think.
Oh, that's perfect. Guys, thank you so much for all of your insights and your commentary and your thoughts on all the questions. That actually brings us to a conclusion to the set questions. We're going to turn it over to the audience, and there's been a few that we've collected. So the first question that was asked was, what is the group's view on the usage of remittance-rich data in an ISO 20022 payment message for analytics to offer better solutions to the clients, next best offer, next best actions, etc.? Nilo, you talked a lot about the repository and its whole. Why don't I throw this question over to you?
For sure. So from a remittance data perspective, if you look at the overall structure, take, for example, e-transfers with a request to pay. So the remittance information in there can go down to your invoice number, detail of who you're collecting the invoice from, what is the purpose of the invoice, right? And if you see a certain trend in terms of the pattern, it could definitely look at, and I brought this topic before in one of the questions earlier as well. You could predict your client spend pattern, forecast their spending habits, and build out, say, for example, the next best offer. Or if you see a client constantly paying multiple types of loan that the person is taken from different other FIs or any other personal loans, the FIs could use that data to offer up different type of product services to the clients as well. So remittance information is going to be key also in terms of accounts receivable and payables as well, in terms of how you're managing your cash flow and your overall working capital as a firm.
Okay. The next question we had was, what could be the best practices to get ISO 20022 onboarded for a firm who is based on check payments currently? Charlie, what about you take this question?
This is a good question. So I again, here you have to start with your FI. I'm sure you have to make sure. I think first of all, the corporate needs to understand what they really want to get out of ISO 20022. There's so much that they can do. They want to make sure that they understand strategically what that implementation should look like before they then head into talking to their FI to see what their services are available to them, in addition to whatever ERP software they're using, and whether it's able to create those ISO 20022 formats. I believe it's that conversation again between the FI, the service provider, and potentially even their trading partners to understand what that implementation should look like. I think that's that conversation that needs to start as a best practice.
Key, if I can just jump in there for a second,
sure.
there are I'm not sure the context of the question, but there are a number of financial institutions out there, including ours, that already provide a number of solutions that help you migrate from a paper payment environment like checks to electronic payments. So there's a lot of solutions out there. As we go to ISO, the importance is going to be that when you do that migration, that you keep in mind the ISO flow, so that you build the infrastructure once instead of having to rebuild it once again. It's important that you speak with your FI and you understand what solutions are available to you and what solutions are coming, so that when you develop your capability, you consider not just what is there today, but what is coming in the future, because the future is pretty close and it's coming pretty fast.
So that's a good, that's a really good point, and a really good segue into the next question that was asked. And you talked about this during our initial discussion, where this is no longer a mapping exercise. So the question to you, Nishant, is how do you propose balancing the needs of an internal legacy system versus embracing the new standard?
Right. So, first of all, that statement wasn't meant to offend anyone. It was more of a generic statement in terms of when we're looking at such a sea change in terms of capability, moving to ISO 20022, one needs to look at it with a fresh set of eyes. I've been in the product management business long enough to realize that slapping on a change to a legacy system may work for you in the short term, but eventually your legacy systems, are not able to keep up with the demands of new and changing protocols. So it's what I would recommend is that if you have legacy systems that you're not able to get rid of, and I don't know if this question is in the context of an FI or in the context of a corporate client, but either way, it's important to try and understand the limitations of your system and where your system is going to start falling short. A mapping exercise typically means that the larger ISO spec that you're going to be mapping to a legacy platform is going to have to drop some elements of that richness of data. Just in doing that, you're handicapping the capability of that rich data that's coming through the pipes, right? So think about what your needs are long term. If you're a corporate client, if you're an FI, think about the needs of your clients and whether you'll be able to meet that by doing a mapping exercise. Personally, for my personal opinion, for JP Morgan, we don't think that that's the right way to go. We believe that we need to embrace the new standard in its entirety and provide that. Now, I can say that because we've been working with ISO-based systems for a while now, and our infrastructure is ISO-enabled. So it's a little disingenuous for me to make that statement, but all I'm saying is look at what you have in your legacy systems, look at what's coming down the pipes. There's a huge gap between the two of them. So you need to think about this as a fresh build instead of trying to slap something onto what you have today.
Yeah, fair enough. This is a good opportunity for us to kind of build it right from the start versus trying to do like a Band-Aid solution off of legacy systems. Fair enough. There was one question, and this one's for Nishant and Nilo as well, because you guys, through this discussion rather, you guys talked a lot about the different use cases for ISO. And the question is, can someone talk about the monetization for ISO for banks? Nilo, why don't I throw this one over to you?
For sure. So for monetization aspects, the use cases could be anywhere around the fraud packaging, what Nishant brought up earlier as well, to provide the clients fraud alerts on a timely basis, as well as providing services from a bank perspective. If I look at it, providing those next best offers based on the spend pattern. The other area we could also look at is providing services around sourcing and providing the list of sourcing areas. For example, if you have you're a lumber company and you're looking at the best lumbers around, lumber providers around, you can provide what the best pricing around that is based on the information that you have, or the reconciliation reports that you can provide. If you are working with a third party as an FI, you can provide the same services for auto reconciliation to your clients as well. So a lot of monetization is going to come through talking with the clients to understand their pain points in their value chain as well. So these are some things on top of my head, but as you talk with your client, understand their pain points, where they have challenges. Is it reconciliation? That's where they spend the most of their time. What complaints they have from their FIs in terms of data and services. So those are a few of the areas that I could think of. Nishant, what are your thoughts around it?
Well, in terms of monetization, the process of monetization can go two ways, right? It can either be new money that you're making, or it could be money that you're saving. So in terms of the fact that ISO makes it far more frictionless, brings you the saving element. In terms of monetizing, the importance of clients wanting to sort of push payments through effectively without that friction would be something that clients would be willing to pay more for. So there's opportunities on both sides, but definitely something that we'll have to work through as we go along.
Perfect. This one's for Charlie. What would be the major additions in the Canadian version of ISO 20022, domestic versus cross-border?
So not necessarily understanding the context of that question, I would say that if we were to look at additions to what we've built already, and understanding that we own at the moment outside in the sphere, we only have versions for AFT in ISO 20022. We are looking to bring on obviously the RTR and also the Lynx MX. But beyond that, I think when we talk about what the value-added services, value-added message formats are on the payment spheres, I see additional capability from like account switching that we could put in the centralized and create that environment to do that. I see so many. I had another one in my mind just now and it just flew away, so my apologies, but there are so many things that we can actually create in the center that facilitates the movement of payments, or even the administration of accounts, account management based on what is already in ISO 20022. In terms of cross-border, I think that's a little bit different and a bit more, it's a little bit more complicated. That speaks to, having conversations with various other jurisdictions or market practices to get that on the way, but it's not impossible. So there's lots. I think there's lots out there, and I'm excited to see all of it come to fruition.
Perfect. Okay, last question before we wrap up. What is the impact of ISO 20022 on open banking? Any brave takers for this one?
Sure, I'll take that one. So we at JP Morgan are very excited about open banking. It's something that we think is the next step. It's the natural evolution of the marketplace, and we think we'll go there. Unfortunately, we can't do it with what we have today. So ISO 20022 is almost essential to open banking, because the width of information that needs to travel with those payments will be critical, right? So all to say that it's definitely something we're excited about. It's something that we are working on. Stay tuned, and it'll be coming.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, guys, thank you so much. That brings us for time for today's session. I want to personally say thank you to Nilo, Nishant, Defne, and Charlie for spending your time today and sharing your thoughts on what the value add of ISO 20022 will provide to us Canadians, both businesses and consumers. And thank you for the audience for providing us with great follow-up questions to further this discussion. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of the summit, and hopefully we'll cross paths again soon, okay? Have a great day, guys. Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Enjoy the summit.
Bye.
Bye.